So this video is we're going to make to show you how to switch the belt, an old belt or a broken one, for a new belt on the studio size mixer. First thing you want to do is to either disconnect the machine from the wall, or make sure the breaker is shut off, just so there aren't any accidents, you know, somebody bumping the on switch or something while you're working on it. And then the belt guard needs to come off. There are 2 bolts on there. This is a nut driver. It's a 7/16 inch size, or you can use a ratchet. Just loosen those 2 up, and then you have to fiddle around sometimes. Some of these, depending on what type of motor's on there, are a little bit tighter. You have to get that wiggled around and off of there. Make sure you save your bolts. Don't lose them. So first thing I'm going to want to do is loosen up the motor so it can slide in. And if your belt's broken, obviously it's off already. But if it's just an old belt that you want to replace, you have to slide the motor in, and then we can pop the belt off. So first thing I'm going to need to do, there are 2 nuts that tighten in against that channel to hold that tight. So we need to loosen the first one, and then run it down a ways, loosen the second one, run it a ways in, and then we're free to loosen this outside. And then before this is going to move, I have to loosen up all 4 of these bolts. So I'm going to use a ratchet, and that's a 9, what is it? It's 11/16, that's what it is, size. And I'm not going to take them all the way loose, but I'm just going to loosen them, so that's going to allow that to slide in and out. So these 2, and then there are 2 on the back. And again, don't take them all the way out because your motor will fall off, but just loosen it so it allows it to slide. And then a 3/4 inch socket will fit right on the end of that bolt. And you can just loosen that, and it probably will actually come all the way out of that bracket. Possibly. But I loosened it, as you can see there's a little bit of space right there, and then I'm just going to push the motor in. And loosen it a little farther. You can see that came all the way out of there. It's not a problem, we just have to thread it back in when we start. So then my belt's loose, it dropped off the tub, and I can get it up over top of the pulley, the sheave, and then it's loose from everything. So the next thing we want to do, there are 3 large sheet metal screws that actually hold the 2 frames together. So we're going to loosen those. Let's see what size here. I'm going to loosen it but not take it quite all the way out. There's 1 of those on each leg. Now the tub is connected to the top of the frame by the center shaft, which is actually cast in, welded to, and cast into this concrete part. And there's a locking collar on there. So the bearing on the top should be locked to the shaft on the tub. So when we raise this frame, it should raise the tub also, and it'll slip up out of the bottom bearing. There's not a locking collar on that bottom bearing. So what I want to do is, these are just like a little jack you'd have in your car or something, an auto jack. You could use stacks of plywood, and if you had 3 people, put a board under there and 2x4 and pry up on it. That would be another way to do it. But some way you need to have the frame bolted down, which is probably bolted to the floor in your studio, the bottom frame. Once I've got those kind of in place, I'm going to go ahead and take these bolts out of there the rest of the way. And I've got those 3 bolts. It's a good idea to get a bucket or something, put all your nuts and bolts in, just so you aren't hunting around later on looking for those. So at this point, what I'm going to do is raise up the frame. The tub should go up with the frame, and then just high enough so we can get the other belt slipped underneath there. So I'm just going to go around. If you got 3 people, you can just have 1 on each jack, but I'm just going to go around, not raising each side too much. Kind of want to watch when my tub comes loose from the bearing. And I don't want to go all the way up until these legs pop out of here, because it's kind of a hassle to get them back in. Just up high enough so I can get the belt slipped between the shaft and the bearing. What I'm going to do now, before I stick my fingers underneath there, just in case that tub would let loose, I don't want to have it drop down on my hands. So I'm just going to get some 2x4s in here, just as a safety precaution. Just in case that tub would drop down. Sure, it's not going to, but just in case. So I've got the belt on the inside of the 2x4s, and 2x4s are in there now. So I'm just gonna reach in. The belt is like this right now. I'm gonna twist one side flat and just slip it through the bearing, between the bearing and the tub shaft, and that belt just slips right out. And then you take your new belt. I'm just going to put the same one back on because it's actually a new belt. And just put it back in the same way. I'm just going to take it and twist one side so it's fairly flat. So slip it into place, twist that just so it slips between the bearing and the tub. And then I'm just going to begin lowering the tub back down. Little bit at a time. And when I get close to that shaft slipping back into the bearing, I just have to make sure that it's going to go back in the bearing. And some of these frames are fairly tight. You might actually have to get a rubber mallet and with the lid open pound the frame down. Don't pound on the lid because it's not a particularly strong part of the mixer as far as pounding on, but rather pound on the right where the pipes are welded onto this top piece. And I'm just watching. Got about another 1/4 inch. Okay, and I'm just going to make sure I'm going down into the bearing instead of sitting on top of it. Drop down. This one right here. You just need to make sure it needs to go down just a little bit farther, and you'll be able to see where the holes, when the holes out here line up, to get that bolt back in. I'm just going to tap it down. So you can use a rubber mallet, or I'm going to use a 2x4 and tap that down. So now I can see that the bearing is right up against the tub, the part that sits on it that's welded to the shaft. And we're pretty good on this hole, so I'm going to go ahead and put this bolt back in. And I want that pretty snug, but not overly tight. So just snug it up. And then this hole is dropped down a little bit too far. This one is up a little too far. So I'm actually just going to take my jack, put it back under there. That up until I can see that hole is lined up there. Put that bolt back in and just again snug it up. I'm just going to put that jack back out. Check my alignment of the hole back here, and it looks pretty good, so I'm going to go ahead and put that bolt back in. And snug it up. All right. Next thing I want to do is get an end of this wiggled up through there. And again, I'm kind of turning it so it pulls through. And just prop it up on the pulley there, so it's more or less in place. Then I'm going to have to slide that motor forward again, pretty much as far forward as it goes. Eyeball it to see, it'll run somewhere on this blue part of the tub. And I kind of want to eyeball it to see where it is lined up with that pulley. And then I'm just pulling it up. Pulling it up onto the tub, starting at one side, lining it up fairly straight, and then just pulling it up all the way around. It actually helps to have a second person to help hold it at that point. And then pull the motor back to tighten it up. So the next thing, I get this threaded rod back started in that hole. And that's the tensioner. That's what we're going to use to put some tension on the belt. And then what actually holds the motor and everything in place while it's running are these 4 bolts. So I'm going in until that just starts snugging up a little bit. And then you can see how much that moves back and forth. Now there are tensioners that come with these belts, and it's you clean off a little bit of this, and then break off one of these. So, should add some Windex or something, maybe just make sure the belt's good and clean. When I'm putting these on, I actually don't use these things because I can't ever get them to work, but you're quite welcome to try. So what you do is you peel the 2 ends off so it exposes the sticky part, and once your belt is kind of snugged up a little bit so there's not a whole lot of floppy slack in it, you want to stick one end on there and then push it flat down against the belt and stick the other end on. And what that'll do is as you're tensioning the belt, it actually stretches. And the 2 parts of it pull apart, and there's a little marker on there that kind of lets you know when it's the right tension. So we'll give it a try here. And I'm just going to keep watching that and kind of keep feeling my tension there. And we get them pretty tight. And there's supposed to be a little kind of yellow mark that moves across there to about 2.5 or so. And like I said, I can't ever get them to work. So, what I do is set the tension so you can see when I'm pushing on it fairly firmly, there's some deflection there, but it's pretty stiff. And what you want to do is probably go a little bit under the tension that you think it needs to be first, and then as you use the mixer, if it starts slipping, you're going to have to tighten it up a little bit. But better to be a little bit under than a little bit over, because you don't want to break the belt. It'll take a lot of tension, but eventually it will break. So you can kind of see as I'm pushing on that about how much deflection there is. And the other thing is when I tighten these 4 bolts, it tends to pull the motor up a little bit and increases the tension a little bit. So once I got that tension about where I want it, I'm going to come back and then just tighten up those 4 bolts. And again, snug them up. Don't you don't have to get ridiculous about tightening it, but get them good and snug. And I usually start with this bolt, move to that one, and then do the back 2. Alright, so all 4 of those are tight. And like I said before, it's actually those 4 bolts that hold the motor in place while you're using it, while it's running. This tensioner actually, I mean, it helps a little bit, but it's mostly for tensioning the motor or while you're tensioning the strap to begin with. And then what I usually do is I'll put the vice grip on that end, and then the 2 nuts that are on the inside, I bring them back against just to lock everything into position so that doesn't vibrate loose. So I tighten up the first one, and then the second one I bring back and just tighten it against that one. And when you bring 2 nuts together, it locks them into position. So that locks all that together. It's not going to vibrate loose while you're using the machine. And let's see, I guess that's about it. Then the chain guard has to go back on. Wiggle it back in there. And make sure you're not going to be rubbing. There's a little bit of adjustment in those, so just make sure you have clearance between the chain guard and the tub. And then tighten those up pretty good. That's about it. And I'd say use it, try it out, and if you need to adjust your tension, take the chain guard off again, loosen the 4 bolts, and then these 2 nuts, and then you can adjust the tension in or out with that threaded rod. That's about it. I guess if you have any questions while you're doing it, go ahead and give us a call, and we'll try and answer them. And some of the frames are a little more difficult to get apart, so it might take a little bit more time than that took. But that's the process.